I am now proud to present, without further ado, Saadia.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي ربنا زدنا علما. I'm very excited to speak to all of you today on a topic that I'm very passionate about. I'm very passionate about couples in general. I've been working with couples for years. Alhamdulillah, I have the opportunity to work with individuals, couples, and families, but I'd have to say that my favorite is couples. I see so much strength and resilience and hope that they don't see very often. And alhamdulillah, I have been given the opportunity to show them that lens. Oftentimes when couples come in, and they're coming into that first session, and especially working with the Muslim community, they've been dealing with issues for a very long time. You know, I work with non-Muslims and Muslims, so when I ask them, when did this problem start? When did you start having these issues? My non-Muslim couples would be like, oh, maybe a few weeks ago, last year, 6 months ago. Muslim couples, 16 years ago. Or the day after we got married. And so my thing is, what took you so long to come in for therapy? And that's something that we have to change as a community. We have to change that as a society. Couples therapy is for absolutely anything. It's for absolutely everyone. If you're having an issue that you're not able to solve, or you're fighting over it, or it's been 2-3 days and you just can't figure it out, go see a couples therapist. Because this is a professional that is looking in on your relationship, and believe me, can see a lot more that you never even thought about, that you didn't even realize. And particularly a marriage and family therapist, and yes, I'm biased, but we're trained in systems theory. We're trained in specifically working with couples. Because there's a lot of therapists out there, there's a lot of psychologists, psychotherapists, etc., who do work with couples, but somebody with an LMFT background is specifically there to work with couples. And so my favorite researcher is Dr. John Gottman. Can you raise your hand if you've heard of him before? Wow, not as many as I thought. So Dr. John Gottman is somebody that you should look into, and to look into his work and read it and study it together as a couple. He is a researcher, and he's studied couples for over 40 years. So he has a love lab in Seattle, and he had couples come in, and he had them hooked up to all kinds of monitors and video cameras and everything, and did research for 40 plus years. And he can predict with 90% accuracy, with just 3 minutes of the couple's conversation, who's going to divorce and who's not. 3 minutes into their conversation with 90% accuracy. And so look into his research. It's real. It's great stuff. And so he has a book, The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. Get the book as a couple and go through those quizzes together. There's quizzes inside the book, The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. So my topic today is just on one of the 7 principles. So we're going to dive into this, inshallah. The topic is let your partner influence you. Let your partner influence you. And this is one of the 7 principles of making marriage work. So successful relationships have a 5-to-1 ratio of positivity versus negativity. Okay, so for every negative statement that you say to your spouse, or that your spouse says to you, you've got to counteract that with 5 positive statements. And that helps a lot of couples, because that's something you can do right away. That's something you can do right now. You're sitting next to your spouse, You both have your phones. You can text something to each other, whisper in each other's ears. We know you're doing it anyways, and make sure it's something positive. And so 5 positive to every 1 negative. You can eliminate the negative. That's perfect, right? So that's the kind of culture that you want to create. So Gottman talks about creating a culture of appreciation. And we know that Saadia talked about that appreciation. But your house, your home, where you are with your spouse, you want to make that an atmosphere, a culture of appreciation, where it's not weird if somebody says thank you. Oh, thanks for doing my laundry. Another person is like, what? Where'd that come from? What do you want from me? No, it's a culture, it's an atmosphere. You've created that. So it's a beautiful feeling of thank you. And so that's something to keep in mind in your relationship. So the fundamental principle of let your partner influence you. I want to warn you in advance that this is not just coming from me as a woman, but this is coming from Gottman. And so, especially the men in the audience, I want you to hear this, okay? So the research, Dr. Gottman found that the happiest, most stable marriages in the long run were those where the husband treated his wife with respect and did not resist power sharing and decision making with her. And he really found that the spouse that had the most trouble letting their spouse influence them were the husbands. And so women, wives, they're found to a bit more easily allow their spouse to influence them. And what does that mean, allowing your spouse to influence you? There's hundreds of decisions we make every day. So a lot of it is in the decision making, the big stuff, okay? Buying a house, raising our children. Are we gonna live with the in-laws or not? And yesterday I did a specific talk about in-laws as a whole. So all of these external factors, right? These decisions that we're making. Are we gonna spend this kind of money? Are we gonna have a joint bank account or just individual bank accounts? How are we gonna figure things out? But a lot of it are the small decisions. You know, what should I wear to this family gathering? What are we gonna eat for lunch? Should we go there for the weekend or not? So all of these decisions, letting your spouse influence you is really listening to them, hearing what they have to say, valuing their opinion, valuing what they have to say based on who they are, their experience, their background, and taking that into account. Actually listening to them and maybe taking their opinion. Oh, you really think that's a good idea? Okay, sure, let's go with that. So the research shows that men have a tougher time doing that they have a tougher time taking their wife's opinion, listening to her, respecting her voice. Men were the ones to be found to be like, no, I know what I'm doing. I'm gonna do whatever I want. I don't care what you say. I'm not gonna listen to you. And so a lot of his research is based on that, especially when it comes to this principle. You'll find it in the book. It's to both genders, but really that it depends so much on the men that when you allow your spouse to influence you, you are giving your marriage a huge advantage. You're actually contributing to making your marriage work. And so a lot is on you. So when the couple disagreed, those husbands actively searched for common ground rather than insisting on getting their way. So think about your relationship. This is not just information for everybody to soak in. Focus on your relationship, your marriage. And if you're not married, then a future marriage that you'd want to have. In an argument, in a disagreement, do you listen to your spouse? Do you take a step back and say, okay, let me hear you. What are your thoughts? What's going on? Let me hear you. Let me listen to what's happening. Or do you stick to your own way of doing things? Are you stuck on your opinion? I'm right and you're wrong. Or do you say, maybe we're both wrong? Or maybe you are right. let's hear that. Let's figure it out together. Let's talk about it. How do your arguments go? How do your conflicts go in your relationship? So of course, husbands are not the only ones to blame, but according to research, a significant gender difference exists, especially in handling areas of conflict. And one thing I do when I work with couples is I help them to calm themselves down, because Gottman talks about it a lot, and all the trauma researchers and trauma specialists talk about it a lot. Because I've done a lot of training in trauma, and a lot of it is we become triggered in these arguments, right? There's some kind of button that's pushed. There's some kind of trigger. Oh, you mentioned that again, and then your anger just rises. You just bubble up to the top. And so when that happens, and this is going to be huge, inshallah, for you to take back home into your marriages, it's for you to recognize your own physiological arousal. When you're just too worked up that you're not listening to your partner anymore. Because what does that do when you're physiologically aroused? Your hands are sweating, your heart's racing, you're feeling way too angry, way too emotional, the tears are flowing, or you feel like yelling or screaming, or you yell and scream at each other. You are at a disadvantage, because what that does is it sends a signal to the brain that you have to be in fight or flight mode. There's no more negotiating, there's no more listening, there's no more paying attention to what the other person is saying. Your frontal lobe is off, it's offline. And you are in fight or flight mode. And just imagine husband and wife that are in fight or flight mode. Where are they gonna get to? They're either going to fight, they're gonna scream, yell, all kinds of stuff. Or they run. I can't handle this anymore. I don't want to deal with this. Or they don't even say anything and they completely shut down, which Gottman calls that stonewalling. So when you are physiologically aroused, you cannot listen to each other. And so what I help couples to do is to recognize that individually, when you're too worked up, and collectively together. And I help couples to figure out maybe like a phrase, a catchphrase, or some word where they can signal to each other, hey, we're not listening to each other right now. So let's take a break, let's take a step back, let's listen to the Prophet ﷺ drinking water, making wudu, laying down, doing something to come back to the conversation. And something, again, particular to the men, Gottman's research found that it takes men a lot longer to calm down when they're physiologically worked up than women. It takes men longer to calm down. They may look stoic and completely like they've got their stuff together and calm and relaxed, and the women maybe like, it's more outward, but actually physiologically inside, the men are still 15 minutes. He says maybe 5 minutes, the women are ready to kind of come back to the conversation. They've calmed themselves down. Men need at least 15 minutes. And so really I tell couples 15, 20 minutes, take a breather and come back. And he had heart monitors, pulse monitors, everything. So all this research is real. It's not just guesswork. And so recognize when you are too worked up, you're in fight or flight mode, you're no longer listening to, you're at a disadvantage, and Shaitan is right there. He's running through your veins. He's ready to, he loves that point of when you're physiologically aroused and you're in fight or flight mode, believe me, he's right there. Because he wants marriages to break up. And so when you can recognize that as a couple, you can step back and actually listen to each other. Have a catchphrase. Some of my couples have come up with silly things like butterfly. So they'll say butterfly and they'll start laughing and then they'll kind of take a break from it. So what is your phrase or your word? And make sure that you decide that together, because your word or your phrase could be a trigger for your spouse. So if your word is like, let's talk about this later, and then your spouse is like, wait a minute, like we're talking about it right now, get back over here. And so that can be a trigger for your spouse. So you want to come up with something together. What is our phrase or our word that when we're too worked up, we're not listening to each other, and we'll come back to the conversation. So allowing your spouse to influence you. So if you're in that state of being calm, you're more likely to listen to your spouse. So that's number one, to make sure you're at a calm physical state. Okay? And then it's about listening to your spouse, hearing them out, giving them that space. So Gottman talks about a culture of admiration. It's not just appreciation, it's admiration. Because will you listen to somebody that you look down on? Will you take somebody's opinion that you look down on them and you think they're less than you and they don't know anything and they're incompetent? Will you listen to somebody when you think that way about them? No. If you think you're superior and I know everything and I'm the smart one, you won't hear the other person out. So it's building a culture of admiration as well. And that goes back to gratitude. That goes back to the first talk. The trick is you want to admire your spouse. You want to look up to them. You want to value them. Because then you'll listen to them and you'll really hear them out because you'll respect what they have to say. If I don't respect you, why am I going to listen to you? And that ties back into why do you think you're better than your spouse? You know, why is that arrogance there, that position of I'm better than you there? So you want to work through that individually, but also collectively. How do we create and cultivate this atmosphere of admiration and appreciation? And that has to be done over and over and over again. Alhamdulillah, I've been married 16 years, and it's not easy, right? Marriage is a struggle, but it's important to check in with each other, right? It's a relationship check-in every week, or fine, every month. You sit down together and you say, how is our relationship? Are we respecting each other? Are we appreciating each other? Do you feel heard in this relationship? Do you feel like you have a voice in this relationship? Do you feel appreciated? And so it's sitting down and it's really checking in with each other. Because what do? We just kind of go along and expect everything to kind of work out. And when there's a problem, poof, then we'll deal with it then. But what we want to be proactive instead of reactive. We want to be proactive instead of reactive. Don't wait for something to happen. Don't wait for a fight or a problem or a difficulty to occur. Prepare ahead of time. And that relationship check-in every week, every month if you have to, but definitely every week you want to do that. Sit together and check in with each other. And that's where you'll give your partner that space of, letting them influence you because you're actually hearing them out. You're listening to them. You're listening to their issues and their arguments and their complaints against you. So there's something Gottman talks about as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And these are 4 things that you want to eliminate from your relationship. And when these 4 horsemen are there, remember I talked about earlier, Gottman, in the 3 minutes of the conversation, he could tell who was going to divorce or not. He was looking for the 4 horsemen. And so it's the same thing I do when I first see you in my office. I'll have you turn to each other. Not the first thing, I'll get to know you first and everything, but after a while, near the end of the session, I'll have you have a conversation with each other, right? And there's a lot of observing, there's a lot of coaching. One misconception people have about couples therapy is that the therapist is a judge, and she's gonna say, I'm right, I'm wrong, and you're right. And that's not what a therapist does. There's no judgment, there's no, oh, you're wrong, you need to stop doing that. And a lot of people fear this, but a therapist is that coach, helping the 2 of you communicate better, helping the 2 of you figure out what your issues are, what your weaknesses are, what your strengths are, and using them to strengthen your marriage even more so that you can have a better relationship. And so the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse are criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. Speak to each other when you get out of the session and ask each other, do we have this in our relationship? And if we do, we need to get help. We need to figure out how to remove these. Criticism, putting the other person down, making fun of them. Why do you do this? Oh, this is so bad. That doesn't look good on you. You shouldn't do that. And so that will put the person down. We know that already, right? It'll make them feel negative about themselves. So when you're criticizing somebody, how are they going to feel about you, the person who's criticizing them? Are they going to want to be around you? Are they going to want to give you what you want? Are they going to love you in the way that you want? So removing that criticism and that contempt, that goes even further. That's a whole nother talk on what we talked about earlier is looking down on the person. Looking down at them, that I'm better than you, I'm smarter than you, I look better than you, I have more money than you, I make more money than you. And so all of these things, and so you look at your spouse and you look down on them. That's contempt. And this is actually the greatest predictor of divorce. The greatest predictor of the relationship failing is contempt. So immediately when I see that in a couple, we have a lot of work to do, right? Because we have to build to that relationship of admiration and appreciation. Defensiveness, and usually criticism and defensiveness go hand in hand. So if somebody's making fun of you and says, oh, you know, why did you do this? Why are you wearing that? You don't look good in that. And then the other person will be defensive, right? This is why. And so you want to take that out of your relationship as well. And the last being stonewalling, and I mentioned it earlier, is where you are no longer listening to your partner. You put an emotional wall up where your spouse is trying to talk to you, trying to express to you, trying to be heard. And you may be sitting there in the same room, but you are offline. You're not listening to them whatsoever. And the convenience of the phone allows us to do that, unfortunately, where you think the other person is listening and they're not. So as a couple, it's really for you to recognize your spouse, their body language, their tone. Are they listening to you? Are they paying attention? One thing I notice couples do a lot is there's this monologue. So one person will talk for like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and the other person is just sitting and kind of nodding their head. And I asked them, I said, do you know if your spouse is listening to you? And one person said something like, yeah, they're in a listening stance, or they're nodding their head, they're listening to you. But did you check in? Did you find out if they're actually listening to you and paying attention? And so what you want to do, it's called a dance, right? It's a couple's dance. And so imagine yourself dancing with your spouse. Are you going to be on the dance floor on your own and your spouse is on the sidelines? Is that dancing together? Or is that, I'm just going to dance and you watch me? A dance is putting out your hand for the other person. You dance a little bit and then you put out your hand. Come join me. You have to do the same in your conversation. So I dance a little bit, I say what I want to say. Oh, this has been bothering me, I don't know what we should do. And then you put out your hand. What do you think? What are your thoughts on this? What advice can you give me? What opinion can you give me? And so you're inviting the other person into the conversation. This is letting your partner influence you. It's not just, I want to say whatever I want to say, and I don't really care if you're listening or paying attention. It looks like you're listening, but it's more important for me to hear my own voice. So you want to invite the other person into your conversation and really ask them questions so that you're testing if they're listening. And you're asking them above and beyond that, not just testing if they're listening, but getting their input and getting their advice. And we know that the Prophet ﷺ, he did this beautifully, right? He turned, just like as the Sheikh was telling us about the story where he turned to his wife when he received revelation. And she was that place of comfort. So it's not just one way. It's not just allow your spouse to influence you, turn to them, get their advice, but it's also the other spouse being a safe space, being a comforting ear. Because if somebody's going to ask for your opinion and you're going to be like, well, I told you to do that in the first place, or you should have listened to me in the first place, or the criticism and defensiveness and all that kind of stuff, are they going to come to you again? Are they going to ask for your opinion again? They may not. So it's also providing the space in which your spouse will turn to you. So just like in relationships between parent and child, the same as between husband and wife. We complement each other. And sometimes we push each other apart. It's never where one person is doing something. Abuse is definitely separate. I'm not talking about abuse here. That's completely different. It's about, if my spouse is acting a certain way, if he's not appreciating me, if she's not doing what I want her to do, if he's not spending time with me, if she's not buying me the things I want her to, what am I doing to elicit that reaction? What am I doing to invite this behavior upon me? It's not about blame. We don't like to blame ourselves, we like to blame the spouse. But it's really about just seeing my part in the picture. Because too many couples are doing what? They're pointing the finger at the other person. But if you're also willing to take a step back and to be like, I'm human, I make mistakes too, I don't always do what's right, then you're able to see your part in the picture. You're able to see that I'm not always right. And maybe I did hurt your feelings. I didn't mean to, but I did, and I apologize. I didn't know that that was important to you, but now I know that that's important to you, and I'm going to do things differently next time. The love languages, so important. Take the quiz, 5lovelanguages.com, and it's the number 5. Because everybody has a different language. If your love language is words of affirmation, and you're giving your spouse words, I appreciate you, I love you, you mean everything to me, and your spouse's love language is acts of service, actions speak louder than words to them. And so they may not hear you because you're speaking a different language. It's like you speak, Punjabi and your spouse is speaking Spanish. I don't know if you'll understand each other. So the same thing is with love languages. There's 5 love languages. Acts of service, gifts, words of affirmation, physical touch, and quality time. Take the quiz with each other, and this way you know your love language and you can speak your spouse's love language. So we're going to do a mini quiz here, okay? You can say it to each other, you can say it in your head. Number 1, there are 5 questions, so true or false, okay? Number 1, I'm interested in my partner's opinions on issues in our relationship. Okay, true or false? I am interested in my partner's opinions on issues in our relationship. Number 2, I don't try to convince my partner to see things my way all the time. I don't try to convince my partner to see things my way all the time. True or false? Number 3, I don't reject my partner's opinions every time we argue. I don't reject my partner's opinions every time we argue. Number 4, I believe my partner has important things to say and value them. I believe my partner has important things to say and value them. Number 5, I believe we are partners with equal say in our relationship. I believe, true, I like that. I believe we are partners with equal say in our relationship. If you said true to all of the above, you are likely to accept your partner's influence. You said false to any of them, there's work to do. And the place to turn is individual therapy for yourself, to work through your own issues and your own baggage and your own idiosyncrasies, because we all have them, and couples therapy. If you're not married yet, premarital counseling. If you're married and you have issues, go. You don't have to be on the brink of divorce to to reach out to a therapist. You don't have to be about to fall apart and this is your last resort as couples counseling. You make the job harder for me. So go if you have issues, if you have problems, if you aren't able to figure them out. And so 3 last things, and I'll end with that. Number 1, be proactive instead of reactive. So have those couple sessions with each other once a week to check in with each other. Do you feel heard? Do you feel loved? Do you feel appreciated? No? What can I do better? What can I do to help you with that? You are important to me. So many of us, we think our spouse can read our minds. They cannot read your mind, so you have to tell them exactly what you want and exactly what you're looking for. So be proactive instead of reactive. The second one, communicate, communicate, and communicate. You can't communicate enough. Keep the lines of communication open. And if you feel like they're broken and you're not hearing each other, you're not listening to each other, seek professional help, because they will help you to communicate better. That's a lot of what I do. I just heard you said this. Is that what you heard him say? There's so many assumptions. There's so many assumptions. Oh, so you're saying I don't love you? No, it's not what I said at all. So they're assuming what the other person is saying. Oh, there's a magic tip for that. I did a video, it's on YouTube. I don't have time to go over it, but you can look it up on YouTube. It's called the clarifying question. You want to have that tool in your marriage, the clarifying question, because it gets rid of all those problems with assumptions. And then number 3, couples therapy, of course. If you are having any issues in communication, if you found that, oh, I don't really listen to my spouse, I don't really allow my spouse to influence me, or listen to them, or respect them, or hear them out, then reach out and figure out how you can do that better, because we can always be better. And so don't be afraid to reach out and get that help. I'm licensed in New York, so I can only see couples in the state of New York for therapy. I do offer coaching throughout the country. If you need some coaching, quick coaching skills, you can always reach out. I did leave stacks of my cards in the back. The previous session, there should be some left, inshallah. And if not, I have some up here. Feel free to reach out. I have my email, I have my cell phone number on there. You can just text me, anything, any questions. Hey, you talked about this. How do we go about that? What do you suggest for us to do here? I'm more than happy to answer your questions and get back to you, inshallah. So I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us all in our marriages and strengthen them. It was an honor to speak to you all. Subhanakallah wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you so much, everyone.